We will open the morning with some remarks by Professor Mohamed Salih, the Deputy Rector of Research at ISS, and then we will start our session with the keynote speaker Wendy Harcourt and Rosalba Icaza. The program of this day will continue with some panel and some master classes in the afternoon, and at 6 o'clock we will have some drinks, so you are invited to remain for the whole day. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank you for also, the room is still as full as yesterday, and I know that Tamara and Stefan yesterday, they made some remarks that people should not leave after they have given their own presentations and got their comments, and I think this is not the case. Yesterday, you have a wonderful day. It started well, started with the alternatives, things that we think about here at the ISS, and we continued to the various panels. I at least attended one of them when I was discussant. But I have to wait for my room for half an hour to be vacated. Then this is not a bad thing. It means that there is some very serious discussion taking place, and people are so much engaged in what they are discussing to the extent that they have to take much more time, and I hope this also will happen today. The good thing is that the institute closes at 10 o'clock in the evening. So today I tell you that we can have as much good discussions with very good impacts on our studies and what we are thinking about. We always learn something new. And today also is a very special day. We started, I'm not going to introduce them. I think they will be introduced by Tamara, my good colleagues, Wendy Harcourt and Rosalba. They are, well, I think if I say the new generation, the ISS, some people will say, oh, this man must be kidding us, but it is true. They are, one of them is the youngest staff member at the ISS, and one among the most recent who came here. I said among the youngest, so Rosalba. And some just here not long time ago also, considered new at the ISS, but their impact has already been felt. Their impact and their contribution in the work that we do at the ISS, it is felt in big measures. And some people, of course, their impact on their institutions is measured by years, and some are just by the very present in a very short period of time, and I think they would not let me down. They will testify to that this morning, so I'm already putting some pressure on them as well. For some of you who are not here, this is the 60th anniversary of this ISS. And also, it was also in January already my own 60th anniversary. I wish if I have done a little bit more than 60, because in Africa we celebrate age. And I'm looking forward to my retirement. If I can get an early one, it's even better. And this is a very important occasion to us. Have more than half a century working on development issues and development studies. And the last 3 or 4 years are a little bit different. It's not the same institute that we knew in the past. We are now part of Erasmus University, which meant that we lost some of our independence, some of the things that we used to do here at the ISS and find IS solutions to those things. Now we are part of a much bigger organization, which also requires much bigger effort from our side to cope up with those guys who already knew the bureaucracy of the Dutch educational system for a very long period of time. So we are coping with that. And whatever we start discussing with them, and you, for them, something that they have been discussing for decades. This also would leave an impact on us. But still, we are a very vibrant institute. This year we have gone through the accreditation of our research, and we have accreditation of 3 masters during the last 2 years or so. Our work is at par and also better than so many other institutions. So using the bad word that people use today, and yesterday you warned not to use these kind of words, but we are as competitive. And I'm looking at Frederica with other institutes, and in a sense that we are very happy that you are here. And something that also may be mentioned on the passing, but is very important for us. This is the 10th the 10th Development Dialogue. We have pride in this because it is an activity that has been, Silky is looking at me, so that I'm speaking too long. I will finish very soon. No. No. Don't be apologetic. Have fun. Have fun. Don't take it personal. Don't be apologetic. We said the 10 years, and we said it very. Maybe we said it in the passing, but I think it is a very important occasion for us. Because when this development dialogue started 10 years ago, to be honest with you, many of us had a little bit of doubt, because the whole idea is that this is something that we leave for the PhD students and the staff. Even they have to have a little bit of privilege to be allowed to come of those panels that are only as discussants. And the reason is simple, that we don't want the staff to dominate the debate and to dominate the discussion. Of course, some of us in the academic world have big egos. And when we are in the room, we want our presence to be felt. So we said, well, let us protect the students from that. Let them do their own thing. And those staff members who want to come, they have to seek permission or register their names for a particular. So it is not really an open thing for everybody from the staff to come. And I think that has proven to be very good. From my own experience yesterday, the discussion is really dominated by the students. They have their, I think they already take a few minutes or more than a few minutes in order to finish the panel. And I hope this will happen today. And now, the decision also is not only open for the PhD students from the Netherlands. We receive PhD students from all over the world. And to me also that is very important. That became somehow the international conference for the PhD students. It is pleasing that it is only in 2010 that Eurodoc was started by the Bologna process, whereby the PhD students became part and parcel of the changes in creating the European higher education area. So in a sense, you are even ahead of the European education area when they started Eurodoc in 2007 to be correct. So in a sense that this is really a very, it is our pride, and it is our flagship in terms of teaching and research activities, in which our own PhD researchers don't only present their research but also have the opportunity to interact with other PhD students from all over the world. And I also thank them and congratulate them for the fact that this is always very well organized, very well done, very meticulous, and makes some of us in the academic staff a little bit jealous that those students have so much organizational capability. Some of us are more drowned on our books than trying to organize things. And that is, of course, very good for them, also for their future. With these small remarks, I would like to thank you for your patience, and also maybe I spoke a little bit too much, and give the floor back to Stefania. Oh, to Kees. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. My name is Kees Biekert. I have the task of keeping the time and entertaining this morning so that everyone is going. The first thing we actually started to do is move the chairs, as you saw, because when we came in this morning, it was like a cinema, and we don't like cinemas. We like to see each other. But then, funny enough, everyone sits there, no one sits here. So, so people, but it's almost full there. So, we are going to have a special session this morning with 5 colleagues who are going to have a dialogue, and we are going to do it in 3 rounds. So we are going to have 3 rounds of dialogue with a discussant, and then you can react, respond, comment at 3 particular moments. Since the time is progressing, we are squeezing the 3 rounds to probably 20-25 minutes. We are going to start with Wendy Harcourt. Wendy Harcourt is a colleague, senior lecturer social policy at ISS. And Wendy is probably also known as the editor of the journal Development. Then we are going to continue with Rosalba Icaza from Mexico, from ISS, who is a senior lecturer in international political economy. Both actually are consider themselves as academics and activists, and that is going to be also the topic about which they are going to speak. Afterwards, I will introduce also the discussants to you. Now, let's do that right now. Let's do that right now. Because I just want to have the order clear. After the first round, we have the discussant. Helen. Helen. Okay. Helen Hintjens. Helen. Welcome, Helen. Also, a colleague at ISS. Helen will sort of respond after the first round. After the second round, Silke Hoijman, who was already briefly introduced by Mohammed. And then the third round, John Cameron. Okay. Please, Wendy.
Okay. Thanks, Kees. Well, as you can tell, this is going to be, let's say, a little bit more of an informal event. And that's because we're taking very seriously, Rose Alba and I, the concept of a dialogue. And thank you to the PhD students for inviting us to be what they've called us keynote speakers. But the way we've interpreted that is people who can be leading the dialogue and continuing actually on with what Frederic Apfel-Maglen also started yesterday. And so I think what we were going to do is to really try and open up what is it like to be a feminist activist researcher in an institution like this one, and really try to show you, both by some of the stories that we have, through which we have learned, A, to be researchers, but also to be activists for social justice and for equity, which is the topic of the overall 2 days. So what we decided we would do is sort of, in a way, explore together some of the stories. So and dialogue has already started earlier on as we prepared for this session. And then we have our colleagues who will come in and comment very much in a spontaneous way. And we hope then also, of course, the audience will join in. So this is not a formal keynote speech type of approach. It is really us trying to open up and taking from the spirit of Frederic, how is it that we do research? How is it that we are feminists? And how do we make all of that meaningful within an academic institution as it goes out to the people with whom we are really engaging in terms of trying to make social change? So that's the sort of setting of where we're going to be speaking. And I should say, as you can see already, it's a pretty messy business. When you're talking about doing this type of research, there isn't this sort of scientific ruling of how one does it. It's really also following the ways in which the world is a messy place. So I think that's also something to say and something to also explain why the chairs are as they are. So I hope that you'll enjoy the conversations in that spirit. So as we were speaking, I thought I would, having thought about what Frederic was saying and also what Mohammed was responding to, I thought maybe I could just tell a couple of stories that come from my own research, but also my own activist engagement, which is really around the big concept of, I have a problem with glasses. I never know how to keep them on or not, so I apologize. I can't see you, and I really like to see you, but then I can't see this. So that's another messy business of academia immediately. But so I will have to keep them on, and I'm going to see my notes. So essentially, I wanted to just talk through that two big moments that have happened around what is environment and sustainable development. And I'm doing it, just telling two stories which try to reflect the ways in which I think feminist research has made an impact on, indeed, this concept of what is environment, what is sustainable development, but not through the sort of political processes of intergovernmental exchange, but more through the engagement as social movements and as people who are passionately concerned with their environment, with their cultures, and with trying to come together within a very different framework of understanding what is environment, what is sustainable development, that the traditional mainstream development process has created. So the two moments is, one was a very special moment for me because it was sort of an entry point into what I now see as sort of transnational feminism, which was a conference held in Miami called the Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet, which was held in 1991. And it was a preparation meeting for the big UN conference that was held in 1992 in Rio, the Conference of Environment and Development, UNCED. And it was about 1,000 women who came together from all over. Amazingly, money was sort of made available in that 1989 plus period. Resources were there to bring 1,000 women together. And it was actually the beginning of an organization called Women in Environment Development Organization, WEDO. But the point was there were resources to bring women together to talk about how could we see this UN meeting that was coming up the next year in Rio, and what were our issues, what were the things that we really wanted to bring to that global conference. These days, when there are so many global conferences, you can't believe how exciting it was, the idea that you as an ordinary sort of citizen could think that you could have a voice to that. So it's, you have to take yourself back, or not all of you would take yourself back 20 years, but if you think back to sort of pre-global ICT communications, it was a sort of a big moment to sort of meet these people. But what I want to say about it is that, first of all, there was a very ceremonial beginning of this conference. We're in one of these big hotels in Miami, but they had the indigenous women from the land who, I was just reflecting on what Frederic said, that were doing a regeneration ceremony, thanking the people for coming, but also thanking the ancestors for all the different knowledges that they had. It was a very moving ceremony, but probably the first one I saw in these sort of international context. Then at the same time, having had that, there was also a panel of justices from all over the world who were high up on the High Court of Justice, also there, who were representing, the sort of high level of the nation state. And they were also there as a panel listening to testimonies then of women movement activists who were coming to the meeting to give their narratives about how the environment was being degraded and what impact it was having on their communities and their bodies. So, for example, it was the toxicity in wasteland that was impacting on children. Women came from areas from different parts of the world talking about those problems, how they dealt with it. Women from the Pacific talking about the nuclear fallout, which was creating jelly babies. Really horrific stuff, but also talking about it as something they could bring as a testimony and have the judges, the real judges who had come to the meeting, to sort of to them kind of give a judgment and say, well, these are the things we're going to take to the UN to say we want to stop these types of injustices to our bodies, to our land. And also there are many, I'm just mentioning a couple of them, but definitely it was a very holistic vision of what they wanted to bring to UNCED, how they wanted to stop militarism, stop the ravages of capitalism, end environmental degradation and violence against women's bodies. And to them, that was what environmental concerns were about. It was a combination. Also, I should add, violence to the different cultures as well. That was also there. So these were the things that were taken to UNCED the next year. I won't say that it changed the world, but certainly within what emerged from Rio, there was an Agenda 21, and there was a very strong women's chapter and a very strong sense of women who were there for change through these sorts of processes, very different types of processes that were fed into the intergovernmental arena. So that was one narrative I wanted to mention. I was there, part of it, but I was also writing about it and also really trying to use writing and research to make those sorts of changes in the policy world, but also in how we understood environment, how we understood the relationship to bodies and to environment and to bigger issues of capitalism. So that was one. And then I just wanted to quickly say about 20 years later, there's now been Rio Plus 20, all these acronyms that we end up using. And again, another meeting that was held to prepare for that was in Cochabamba, not a women's meeting, but rather a meeting with peasants, indigenous peoples, and people really looking for alternatives that again were saying, well, what can we bring to the Rio debate, the 20 years later debate? Now there, whereas the earlier meeting, people felt that what you did is you then went into the meeting, you negotiated, you worked with policy, you joined with the governments. This second meeting, 20 years later, much less willingness to engage with government, to be part of those processes, a lot more cynicism. And the concept of sustainable development very much questioned. So rather than adding your knowledge and ideas, the idea was rather to really step back and say we need to really have a different type of cosmovision. And that's again what Frédéric's talk pointed to, that the need to have this, what she called biocultural regeneration, and really understanding the huge dangers we're in relation to, you know, men's and women's domination of the earth, and seeking to try and transform it through very non-Western understandings. So that was an event when it came to the when they came to the Rio meeting 20 years later than the earlier one. It was a separate event, and it was one that was not trying to engage with the intergovernmental organizations. So it was also interesting for me that what you had is, whereas in the earlier one you had a real fusing of trying to bring, let's say, the grassroots civic understanding of what environment was, what nature was, what culture was, into the governmental one, you had rather people staying separate and saying, no, we need a real different type of cosmology. Really, we need to work with different forms of networks and experiences. So they came out with another future we want, rather than trying to link on to the governmental claim of a future we want. That sounds quite glib, but that's fairly profound in terms of the ways in which people can say that it's very hard now to be working through how can we really find policy examples, because you've got such competing ways of understanding what is nature, what is culture. But what I wanted to say is, what's interesting for me is the feminist intent was embedded very much in that alternative vision, rather than in the second, the intergovernmental one. So for me, I just want to open up, we're going to continue the dialogues, but with saying that here we have a sort of 20 years experience, and where has feminism, where has research, where has that type of concern for environment, for culture, for nature gone to? And in many ways it's gone to a very critical, even more critical view of development, of the concepts of sustainable development. And I think for us at ISS that is a real challenge about where do we put our interest and our concerns. So that's my first narrative, and now we pass over to Rosalba, who will respond and continue.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everybody for being so early here listening to us. It's really an honor and a responsibility to hold this microphone. I would like to react to one specific element of what you have been talking about, the emergence of the notion of cosmology, especially after 20 years of debates in these kind of settings. Why for me is a very interesting concept, or let's say it's also a political tool. And let me explain you why. Because Wendy is not referring as another paradigm. It's talking about a cosmology. And from my point of view, this conceptual device allows us to understand that we need different forms of engaging as well, politically engaged. As not making reference again to the sustainable development paradigm, but to voices that claim for a different cosmology, is also, from my point of view, a claim for different ways of knowing. In a short way, different epistemologies that, of course, have been coexisting, but not in a vacuum, because as we have just been hearing yesterday, they have been actually, some of them have been suppressed by what many people see as the Western canon of science. So for me, it is a very important moment when people in these venues and in this process of engagement start to use the word cosmology, because it is pointed at this need to think in different ways and allow different epistemologies to actually flourish. But the other notion, or the other understanding that I found very interesting, is the cosmology as a political tool of engagement. Why a political tool? Because the way in which it has been used, not only in these venues, but in other spaces, for example, on land rights, on questions of political autonomy by indigenous groups with whom I have been working in Mexico, it is used to localize universalistic claims. Some of these issues were also addressed by our speaker yesterday, and from my point of view have been very successful in noticing why how some of these universalistic claims to human rights or to justice are actually local experience or based in local experiences that are actually embodied. And actually coming from very specific experiences from the trajectories of Western thinking and Western, but also Western histories of oppression. So this is my first reaction to what you have said, and in order to continue with this kind of thinking on how the way we know is very much linked to local histories and embodied experiences of power, but also of oppression. These are not separate, these come together from my point of view. I would like to show you a very brief video that is going to allow me to continue this reflection that I want to bring into this panel. It's about, let's say, localized experience of solidarity, cross-border solidarity by women in the south of Mexico. So it's going to last 5 minutes, and after the video I'm going to explain why for me it is relevant to show you in this moment, in this panel, and in this conversation, these images. So let me go to that. have some light. Thank you. Okay, maybe you might be wondering why this video is relevant. Well, it can be relevant for many reasons, but one of the factors why I'm showing it here today is because from my point of view and from the research I do, it defies dominant ideas about Central American migrants, especially as it has been portrayed by the Mexican state as dangerous in transit population, but also, well, when they are visible, but most of the time they are invisible. They are also portrayed as agents of vice and crime from which women, especially women, should be scared of and run away. So for me, this is a very powerful video that tells me very much about how can I engage with a research that addresses these kind of challenges. I recently traveled to Mexico. Last week I was there, no, 2 weeks ago I was there, to Mexico City, my own city. And just by coincidence, what many of the research that I do happens to start, I met one of these women from La Patrona. And instead of simply interviewing her, I just listened to a very interesting dialogue between her and some students from the university where I was invited to present something. And something that I was very interesting to hear was that these women and the group which she belongs to, the community she belongs to, have been labeled the mothers of the migrants by Amnesty International. They have also been labeled the holders of pity by the Catholic Church in Mexico. Of course, this is done in order to support and make visible their actions in Mexico. But the problem is that they have been labeled in very gendered ways as mothers, as holders of pity. And there are many problematic implications of this. Of course, as a feminist, this is my first reaction to what I was hearing in that meeting. But I want to reflect, and I'm planning to reflect on which are the implications of this for my own discipline, international relations, international political economy, especially because in these two areas, there has been a lot of academic production on how we are supposed to explain resistance to neoliberalism, and how this resistance has been theorized, has been in a very particular way. So my question after having this experience, and I will share this with you, is how the actions of Las Patronas can help me to understand solidarity and resistance across borders in a non-heteronormative way. And for me, it's more than just assessing what they are doing. That has been the traditional approach of international relations and international political economy, but it's actually the other way around, in the spirit of what Arturo Escobar and actually Wendy Harcourt has been doing in the field of development for the last decades, asking how social movements are actually challenging political science theory, especially on the political. What is the meaning of the political? So it's an act of listening. It's an act of asking how we are listening to these actions and to these voices, because we're constantly, at least in the academia, we're constantly, this is my impression, concerned about the act of dialogue and talking. And actually we are trained to speak and to teach and to develop an argument, but very rarely we hear how we are supposed to listen to these voices that immediately are disregarded as political. So to date, I have some few initial thoughts on how to address my question. Let me just venture to say two of these elements. First of all, these acts of solidarity, or what I see as acts of solidarity, defies representations of poor women in the political economy of migration that are mainly represented as without agency by mainstream theories in international relations, in need of some support or a scare of male migrants. Secondly, the other idea that I have now, that is of course not finished, but I would like to share it with you, is that acts of solidarity like these ones are simply ignored by mainstream theory on how the international is being theorized. In particular, IR and IP has been largely focused on state-driven actions, recently on big, replicable non-state actors' actions, or by multinational corporations, global civil society campaigns, etc. There has been a little bit of you know, of attention in what is now called everyday international political economy, which tries to bring an assessment of these kind of acts as acts of subversion resistance, and by that they are incorporating sociology, literature, they are incorporating many of the contributions from anthropology. But for me, there is another layer that needs to be actually taken in my research, my thinking, and my activism, and it's how the academia has actually been co-responsible in making these voices completely invisible from our thinking. Not just on how they challenge political structures and if they are efficient in doing that, but how actually these actions are actually questioning the way we theorize the international. For me, this is a political, not only an academic, let's say, compromise and interest, because it represents what many authors have been calling for as a role, as the main role of the academia, that is the role of contributing to epistemic justice, to making politically visible in the eyes of the public, these voices that have been, and these acts that have been completely suppressed by what I refer before as the Western canon of science, or by well-intentioned labeling and representation in a gender way, as I was referring to. So this is where I'm coming from. This is where my thinking is right now, and I wanted to just to leave these ideas and these images in order to start a dialogue. This is where I'm right now in my head. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rosalba. Can you pass on the mic to Helen to give a first response?
Okay, my first response is that good news is not news, even now. So therefore, when people help one another, say, well, journalists would say, or perhaps even an academic would say, so what? So people are helping one another. That's normal, you know, a mother helps a daughter, a father's supposed to help a son, et cetera, et cetera. Good news is not news. So I think there's a media dimension to this as well. And sometimes there's an effort to make alternative types of news. And I had just written down acts of solidarity. So it's exactly the word that I would use, like Rosalba, is the notion of solidarity. And I'm going to just talk very briefly about the fact that I don't think this is a Western, non-Western issue, but this is more of a science, a question about what is science, what is knowledge. I think that's really the central core question for me. And in human rights, we talk about framing rights. People talk about framing. And why do we bother using such a word? Why don't we just say how people get rights? Because the way that they understand their rights will be a very important consideration in how people organize for rights. So first, before you start organizing, before you start giving people rights, you need to understand what they call a right, what people call a right. And I think this is as applicable to a housing estate in Glasgow as it is to Zapatista communities in Mexico. And I'm going to give you an example of solidarity, which is very comparable with the video that Rosalba has shown. For 3 years in Glasgow, a high-rise community organized so that every time there was a dawn raid by immigration police, the whole community would come out and stand on the stairs and prevent the police officer from getting the family that they wanted to detain and deport. Now, the only reason this worked was architectural. It doesn't work on a far-flung estate, but it works in a tower block. And because of this tower block's architecture, there's only one stairwell. After 2 years, every single person who'd been defended got status. Now, that's politics. That's nothing to do with their having a just cause or any more just than any other asylum seeker, but they were just fortunate to live in a horrible tower block that nobody else wanted to live in. And because the local Glasgow people organised themselves to stop the police officers from arresting these people and putting them in detention, they all got political status, they all got to stay. Now, I think that's a story that was not picked up in the mainstream media, because it's good news. So what? So more immigrants stay. We don't want them anyway. So I think that attitude is not unique to Europe, unfortunately, but it is very marked in Europe. And I work more on Europe than on Mexico, and I think we've got a lot to learn from these women. At the moment, there's something called Kukamp. There's a camp of Iraqi, well, not just Iraqi, Iranian, Kurdish, all organized just near Central Station. So next time you go, you know, take a bag of food, whatever, I don't know. I don't call that charity, I do call that solidarity. I think when people are taking a stand and trying to make their lives bearable. For instance, this bunch of people are trying to get papers. They can't go back to Iraq. They can't work. They have no homes. They're not allowed to be housed by anyone. It's illegal. If you house an undocumented person, you yourself will get a fine. If you employ them, you'll be fined. And it's exactly the same in many parts of the States. It's the same in the UK. It's the same, yeah, it's general. And this is a real problem, because people who have no right to rights need solidarity. Because it's all very well saying, go get a job. So I'm not allowed to.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I think this is a moment to also ask you as participants in this dialogue. Anyone would like to comment or ask a question? Or just reflect a moment? Mohammed, yes, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction, but also for the comments that we just had from your other colleagues. For me, I would like to emphasize 2 points. I think as I'm listening to both of you, I just began to think about, and also asking myself why we are more interested in concepts such as global and universal, and not cosmic, and what is the implications of that. And I try to look at it as I'm listening to you by trying to compare and contrast what is cosmological, what is global, and what is universal. And you find that what is cosmic, in fact, is not global, and also it is not universal. It is, in a sense, transcendental. Transcendental not only in terms of individual preferences, differences in groups, in terms of ethnicities or religion, or differences in terms of nations and states and all of that, but transcendental in a sense that it lends itself to ruling out the principles of economics that you were talking about yesterday, the principles of economics and the principles of capital. In a sense, you find that the cosmic is somehow, we understand it as something that is limitless. And even by the best known astronomers in the world, or natural scientists who deal with those issues, they tell you that it is infinite. It has no boundaries. It has no boundaries in terms of reach. It is not controllable. And also, it is not a subject to, cannot be, what it offers somehow cannot be exchanged. Cannot be exchanged for what we think about. So now if the cosmic somehow, and most of us who, for instance, think about it, you think also about issues such as care, solidarity, goodwill, but also care not only for the human, but also not care only for the human animal, but also care for other animals and for nature in general. Now, so in a way that the cosmic is not amenable to disciplinary engagement and disciplinary research using the methods of social sciences, or even those of the natural sciences. So I think it is somehow intentional that our attention, it is intentional that our attention and our gaze has been somehow detracted from looking at the cosmos or dismembering the cosmos into its components. And the components of the cosmos, of course, are the planets, and the Earth is only one of them. In a sense, using the methodology that is common, of course, all social sciences and natural sciences built on the simple idea of the Greek, that is analysis, that anything that before you understand it, you have to divide it into its practical, its parts, and then you see how the whole operates with all these parts having different roles or functions to play. So the question, in fact, you are raising is very important. You are telling us that the type of methodology, the type of science, social and natural, that we need to engage the cosmos as something that is important to us is not, we don't have it. So in a sense that by dismembering the planet, of course, you can colonize some practical, some parts of it, whether it is Earth, whether it is the moon next time, or Mars, or whatever it is. So it may be it is intentional that we do not give much attention to what is cosmic, and it is transcendental in nature, because we are also, some of us probably in this world, are much more interested in differentiation than integration, into the type of science that is based on atomic mechanistic visions of the world rather than the holistic understanding of what the world is all about. Well, maybe I'm saying a lot of things that I myself do not understand.
Okay. Thank you, Mohammed.
Shall we continue?
Would you like to respond to that? Let me just check if there's another. Silke would like to.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, unless you want to add to this one.
Please. It's dialogue.
Yes, the idea of intentional. I was also wondering, several of the things that you said, I think that it is not a coincidence. What you say about, dismembering and, separating and creating boundaries, but also the representation of migrants is not, I'm not sure if it's an issue about good news is not news, because I think there are also like TV programs that are about, I don't know, I guess that emphasize all these emotional things of love and care, but not in that context. And that is very important, because you really need also a particular representation of migrants in order to justify this really, global turn of closing the borders and of criminalizing migration. So you need to create that image of the migrant as a criminal. So it's not coincidental that women at the border are represented in this way, and that they learn to fear migrants, and that migrants are represented as criminals, basically. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Like another thing about the representation of migrants I was thinking about is also that these type of representations are usually excluded from the mainstream, because they don't offer the display of NGOs organizing to help. So they delegitimize completely a certain type of humanitarian conflict that, for example, like in the Mediterranean, you see a lot as spectacularized. And so like I think it's important also to see how like this type of representation breaks the idea that to delegate to an expert is something to do, and that has also to do a lot with epistemology, because it's to break the idea that to do something you need expertise, and that I found interesting.
Thank you, Steffi.
Just one
Rosalba.
Just one clarification on the notion of cosmology. If we understand it as an epistemic position, it's not a thing, and the cosmos is not a thing. If you understand it as a philosophy or as a particular approach to philosophy, then again it's not a thing, but it's let's say it's a dimension of thinking. Let me put it just in that way, in which in which the past is in the present. This is how I explain myself when someone refers to cosmology, especially in Maya territories in Mexico, because the cosmos is not a thing, it's actions and experiences from the ancestors in the past that are not in the past, are in the present. So if we approach the cosmos and cosmology with the Greek dichotomy, that is the foundation of the, I will say, Western canon of science, definitely. It's the foundation, we cannot deny it. We can problematize it, but it's the foundation, then it becomes a thing. And then we separate its parts in order to understand and appropriated and represented through the representation we do about it. And yes, Steffi, that's rightly what I'm trying to show here. In order to take an experience as relevant to build up theory, at least in my discipline, IR, International Political Economy, then it has to be relevant. And relevant is defined in very specific terms, related to policy, related to efficiency, or related to great spectacular actions of people preventing a big boat and fighting for whales, for example, just to be a little bit ironic. Anyway, yeah.
I'm just going to take and continue maybe the dialogue, because that follows very nicely all the different comments, and then we'll quickly get back to the discussants and to the floor. Because in terms of listening, I was very struck by what you said, that it's very important that we're listening to others, and then as academics, that's something that we don't tend to know how to do. We tend to be the ones, in fact, grabbing the mic and talking, for example, what I've just done. But the thing is that we learn how to do those things as our profession. This is where we are. And we also, at the same time, we are also into that sort of performance mode as academics. But I also feel that the listening has to be very active listening. So it's not just listening, it's actually trying to analyze, trying to understand where it is. But thinking of what Frédérique said yesterday, where she said that my first engagement in academia was through the body, well, in India, when you went to India, through dance. And you were referring in your talk yesterday to the left brain and the right brain, and things that are very hard in social sciences to really understand, what it is to understand about bodies. And that, to me, is another area. You're talking about the cosmos up here, is also trying to understand bodies right here, and our passions and our emotions, and how we can think through those things, so that it also makes sense then when you see those women and the racing of the train, and then giving the food, and the sort of danger and fear that was also there in their bodies, because it was an action of solidarity, but also, to me, it looked a dangerous thing to be doing. So I also had a response of that was not just about them, and it was also trying to think through what was that embodied feeling, and then her sense of elation and saying, go, go, go. I mean, that was also something that you could feel and understand, and what that solidarity was about lived through her body, and then that visual kind of connection with that. So I just wanted to, moving on, and this is sort of very much border thinking, not just border crossing, but very border thinking, is that in my own life, and I go back to that, in terms of migrants and working and doing research, although I would say it was more writing up and listening to people's stories, and then it becomes research, is with Philippine migrants in Italy, in Rome. And I have several things to say there. One is I've worked in solidarity with them as a feminist, helping, it's not helping actually, it's being part of their struggle really to be part of the feminist movement in Italy, very complicated because of very different histories, very different cultures, but coming together in a place called Casa delle Donne, which was a reclaimed prison actually, and they finding their space, and then them working through what is it that they need for their communities, very, very different discourses than the ones that the feminists who were also sharing that space were doing, because they were really talking about their rights to work, their rights to be citizens in Italy, which was a real struggle, but also they were people working with the Catholic Church, very different from the feminists who were sharing that space. And they were not interested, or they weren't seeing the interest in, say, sexuality issues in the same way that the people who were sharing the space were. So some complicated negotiations about what was feminist in terms of the work they were doing, which was really about their livelihoods, about the care work that they did. And they didn't want to be speaking about their bodies or the care work they did in the same ways that the feminists, the Italian feminists were doing. So working with them, thinking through with them, but also in my own home, having someone who was caring for my children, who was part of my life as well. So again, just to bring up, when you say about solidarity and the work that we do, I'm one of these middle-class privileged women who is able to pay for a Philippine migrant woman to live and a family actually in the end working in my own home. So also not to make it easy for me, because it's a whole issue of solidarity, yet also being the employer and all of those types of problematics as a feminist. Where do you really work with people and understand and listen to what they're doing, and yet somehow that very close emotional encounter with someone who is also working with your children and being in your home, what type of real research can you do? Because actually it's your life and you're living through those experiences. So I just wanted to mention that, to bring it in, the sort of listening to the bodies, but also the complications of being a feminist and having to listen to your body as someone who has children, who wants to, for example, and wants to then also have caregiving. All those complicated, as I said, messy things about how it is to think through what is research, what is solidarity, and how do you do it with integrity and with authenticity, as we say. But I have to say that the Philippine migrant group, they have totally taken, and this is over years I've worked with them, totally autonomous. They're now doing their own work in terms of understanding who they are and what they're doing. It's very clear. They live both in Italy and in the Philippines. They are making sure their remittances get to their communities. They are dealing with some of the difficulties of living across two lives. But they have a very clear agenda of what it is they want to do and a clear sense of agency. So when I talk about solidarity with them now, we do the research together. They're writing alongside me. And we recently did a paper that was published in a not an A journal, I have to say. So, but it was, I don't know what it was, but in a journal that was really them speaking through how they did their work. And in a way, I was part of that story, but very much on the sidelines. And not that that says anything, but it's just also for them, it was a great thing to be published in an academic journal. And it was interesting how we really had to negotiate that because the woman who wrote with me, her name is Baza, and she didn't want to be first. She thought that wasn't appropriate. And I kept saying, no, it's alphabetical, that's how one does it. So even just to give, even just to get someone into this sort of academic mode, it was also very interesting how to negotiate that you want to have your voice there, and you are listened to, and you can talk about it. I'm sure that was pretty messy. It was about bodies, listening, doing research, working in solidarity, but I hope that just helps open up for the conversation a bit more, and maybe, in my case, really down to earth, and the ways in which I've had to live these things. Okay.
Okay. Rosalba, you want to continue, or would you rather... okay. Yeah, no. Let's take a comment here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Lenka Sobotova from the Czech Republic, and actually thank you to take up the issue of solidarity. And my question is regarding to solidarity and relation with politics, because like these days, like this conference made me think about politics and power, because it was taken into account explicitly or implicitly, and again here right now in the morning too. And thank you for the example from Glasgow, because like I do my research in urban settlements too, and so I'm kind of limited this way. But I mean, this is sooner or later a lot about politics and like research about solidarity, about activism, whatever you call. And my question is like how to face it, how to reflect it in your own research, in your own way, because this is you can't avoid politics. This is there. So like how to, deal with it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Rosalba or Helen would like to respond? Well, you know, the idea of the 3 rounds is already sort of history, so we are doing it a bit differently. Please.
Yes, I think that it was just perfect that Helen brought the example of Glasgow, and that you remind me that I need to say something about that. That is also related to your question. If I'm bringing these experiences, I'm of course bringing them with most of the responsibility that I can bring with them. I'm not trying to speak on behalf of them. I'm also coming from a country in which, as you might know, is very racist, as many other countries. So when my reflection on what is the political side of my work is, which is my role in the academia? Is it to give voice to these women, like many people try to do? My answer to your question is no. In my own experience, what I try to do is how these voices, how these experiences, in my limited interpretation, of course, of them, is challenging the way I was trained to understand the political, the way I was trained to understand the international, by the way, in a UK university. So to what extent these experiences defy the way I have been trained to do social sciences. Now, this is why I'm now in this situation in which I'm very much attached to this. That is my past, but is my present at the same time. But the more I live in Europe, the more I become part of academic institutions, I know that my history is changing. And for example, issues of migration that I always tend to avoid, because in Mexico it's a hot issue besides drug trafficking, it's coming and coming and coming, not only because I'm a migrant myself, privileged one, but I'm a migrant myself, experiencing this kind of problems and situations with friends that are illegal working in The Hague. So at a certain point I know that I will have to address it, and I will have a responsibility to see how to do it. My answer right now as a young academic has been to bring these voices to my own theorizing, because I don't think that I have the position to speak for them. I hope that this is a clear answer from my own experience of how I'm dealing with that and on my own work. But if we can just mention something in order to make more room for the discussants to go back. All these reflections are also coming very much from my engagement as an academic and activist, both, with networks of solidarity in Mexico around the Zapatistas, that you might have heard about them. It's guerrilla that emerged in 1994 to oppose to neoliberal reforms, particularly to the coming into life of the North American Free Trade Agreement. As an academic, I joined all the mestizo, mixed-raced people from the cities that now live in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, where this guerrilla has transformed its fight into a constitution and a building of autonomous communities in rebellion. That's how they call what they are doing. And this means they are constructing specific institutions of, let's say, governance, in terms of health, gender, education, etc. The way I'm approaching this, again, I'm sorry to emphasize this, the way I'm trying to do research about it has been in relation to how their, especially women Zapatistas that belong to this army and that belong to these communities, are defying some of the assumptions that in international relations we have about their role that are supposed to play in a post-NAFTA, post-neoliberalism Mexico. And what I have been written and researching about is that these women in the last 10 years, some of them leaders, some of them commanders of the guerrilla, or women who have been acting politically in their communities, how these positions of leadership are actually, again, defying the role that they were supposed to play under a post-NAFTA era in Mexico as maids in the cities or as maquiladora workers. This has been where I have been focusing my research in order to avoid let's say, claiming a voice that I don't have the right to use in my writing. This is my own ethical position here, but that is making me think how the role actually was decided by particular policies and by particular transformations in the state of Mexico. This is also very much to try to give you an example of the kind of research that I'm doing, and also to answer again a little bit of what you were saying, the previous question. So this is something that I have been working recently in order to bring the political dimension of this defying situation in which these women that were not supposed to be leaders, that were not supposed to be politically active, are actually defying this kind of narrative that is so dominant in Mexico. And probably I will move it to someone that can do it.
Okay. If you would like to start.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, yeah, there are so many things. I don't know where to start. Actually, I want to start maybe also with a personal experience of trying to do solidarity work and encountering, you know, all the contradictions of of what we call a very how to say, what we often just call intersectionality, right? But I mean, in practice, it's really, really messy, as Wendy says, and it's very complicated. When I was 19 in 1991, I went to Nicaragua to do solidarity work in a women's center. It was a new center, but it was actually built upon the old ideas, the ideas of the 80s, of attending women in their needs and giving them like knitting workshops and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, you know, this is not feminist. And then people say, yeah, but you know, this is how we do it here, and you are a feminist because you come from a different country, and etc. Well, I have to say that at the same time, there was a feminist movement emerging in the country. I was in a little town that was, of course, in Managua happening, and there was a whole debate around that. The thing is that at that moment, then I said, okay, well, this is then how we, you know, I kind of accepted the way they wanted to do it. And I also tried to integrate some new topics, like, you know, workshops around violence against women. And later we also, you know, opened up a clinic, a gynecological clinic. So trying to open up new spaces. But in principle, I accepted that. I mean, I said, okay, then, you know, we give the knitting workshop. But the thing is, what I want to talk about is, first of all, how I was seen. I was seen as a white person, a person with resources. I was, of course, associated with North American imperialism, even though I was from Europe. I was young, I had no resources. But, of course, that's what I symbolized, right? That is one thing. And the other thing is that the disc, and to some extent that was also true. I came from a solidarity movement. It was very informal. It was not an official NGO or something. But of course, I also had some power, you could say. So you know, there were these issues, and I learned to conduct myself in a very, very sensitive way about what things I'm allowed to say as a white person. And then I lived there for a whole decade, and I never stopped being that white person, white privileged person, even though I had often less resources than the people that I was sitting in the room with. And actually, I had the first person helping me at home, I mean, maybe 8 years later or so. And until then, I was washing my own clothes and doing my own stuff, right? What I want to say, that it's more complicated, right? And that often also the discourse around, for instance, here we don't have feminists, is a discourse to silence the feminists that are in the country, right? Because there were feminists, there were women who had these, who had other ideas about women's rights. So I'm not sure if I have a point here, but the thing is, for me, it was a long, process of really. Trying to understand how I can position myself, and I still don't have an answer. And I think now that I am a researcher, I am much more privileged actually than I was 10 or 20 years ago, I think even if we do listen, if we try to involve the research participants, there is a clear power relation that we cannot deny. And in the end, we have the power to decide what the story is that we are going to tell. That is something we can't deny, and that is something we have to deal actively with, and that we have to, yes, kind of admit also.
Okay. Silke, maybe you can pass on to John.
I've now been asked to speak. I feel, I'm sitting here, I'm feeling tremendously embodied myself at the moment in this position. Partially not just because of gender, but also primarily because of my location here, because I'm called a discussant and therefore I'm supposed to speak. I feel I'm supposed to speak. Even if I don't particularly want to speak. And I feel I'm meant to speak critically, and I can't speak critically because I've rarely felt so comfortable in this space, which I've been in many, many times, rarely felt more comfortable in this space with what I'm actually hearing. I've been writing and trying to write an article, starting to write an article in the last 4 days, and I can't believe the coincidence of this, is about putting a much richer sense of personhood into what is known in development thinking circles as the capability approach, and thinking about how can we enrich that sense of being a person in that, because it seems to me a lot of the writing is very sterile in that respect. And although I appreciate the benign intent of the capability approach, I think unless it has a more rich sense of personhood, in fact, it offends. I'm going to use that word advisedly. It offends everything what I've been hearing here, which is very much emphasising that. I want to say thank you, a sincere thank you to feminism, because I think it was absolutely vital for the bringing ethnography and thinking about ethnography back into development, into international development discourse, absolutely vital. It's brought so many wonderful concepts as well as approaches back into development studies, which had largely been lost, I felt, with in the sense the retreat of anthropology being labelled as being speaking illegitimately to power, as it was in the 1970s, part of my experience. It's wonderful to see this resurgence, and it's been driven by feminist thinking, no doubt about it. I'm not saying feminist epistemologies don't go elsewhere as well, but certainly that particular aspect has been enormously valuable to me as a thinker, as a researcher, and I hope as an activist as well. So I didn't want to sit here silent. And of course, now being an academic, of course, I'm not being silent at all. But I didn't want to sit here silent, and my silence to be misinterpreted, be misread, be misrecognised as somehow being uncomfortable. I mean, sometimes silence can be about feeling extraordinarily so comfortable that you don't really feel you need to say anything at all. And that's how I feel at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. We have time for a few more sort of comments. Yes.
Thank you. I'm struck by what, I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Cynthia and Wendy said, and how it relates to the presentation of Stefania, who dealt with Italy and the Se non ora quando movement and the portrayal of, the parallelism or fusion between Italian womanhood and the nation through the Berlusconi scandals. And that movement didn't do what you two just did. And she pointed that out very nicely, very, very good work on analyzing the text produced by that movement that portrays the migrant women who work generously to help us Italian women. And you have shown yourself to not be this nationalist white woman, Italian woman-like, and it's very, you really get down to the nitty-gritty and to the difficult issues that are seldom addressed, and it takes courage to kind of, you know, expose your own private life and turn a dispassionate gaze and a solidarity, and find ways of being solidary while at the same time recognizing the power connection. So I just wanted to commend you very much and make the link with Stefania's presentation. And just a small little to Rosalba, the cosmovision, cosmovision, I totally agree with you. The cosmos is not a thing. It's, well, I'm not going to try to say what it is. I can't do it off the top of my head. But, for example, in Peru today, there's a very strong social movement led mostly by indigenous people against a fairly recent, horrible practice of mountaintop removal mining. You know, that's ruining Appalachia in the US, this internal colony of the US, while they're now exporting it to Peru. And they're doing it to an Apu, a sacred mountain. And it has galvanized the social movement. And they are using now slogans such as El Señor Apu, the Lord Apu will punish you. And the Apus are usually both, they're always male and female. There's a male Apu and a female Apu, and I don't know this one, whether it's male or female, I don't remember. But now it's become part of the national political discourse, what I was trying to talk about yesterday, and this cosmovision. And just to make that, you know, I'm very glad you mentioned it. You know, the cosmology, you used the word cosmology. But it's not only ancestors. The cosmology is not just humans. It's also Apus and rivers and kochas and this and that and the other thing. Many, many, many things. And as you probably all well know, in the new constitution of Ecuador and Bolivia, Pachamama, the earth, has been given rights. They don't do much about it, but still it's to be noted. It's a first. It's a historical first in the world, I think. So I think the notion of social movement, solidarity, and cosmovision comes together in these kinds of movements. And I'm very glad to hear from Wendy the shift from the 90s to 20 years later. That's very good news. I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We take two more comments.
Yes, good morning. My name is Sonia Vlachou. I'm a Greek PhD student registered in Hamburg in the Institute for Ethnology. I would first of all like to thank you for a very much down-to-the-ground introduction. And it makes us all feel comfortable about commenting also on shorter, amount of time. I would like also to thank you for showing us this very strong incentive as a start, as a video clip. I made a reading of this as the total empowerment of the individual, and I sort of like interpreted this representation of wild joy, on the face of the woman. This was something that was, in a way, excluding in it per se any other type of like medial representation of pity, of charity, or motherhood in this more hegemonic sense, let's say, as it showed that there is no kind of like big hierarchic discrepancy between this woman and the people who benefit. And it was about the empowerment of herself, like this thing, what she was doing, that communicated this power to the people who received the thing she delivered. As a second thing, I would like to problematize, but I might never receive any answer to this. It's my own existential agony, let's say. Is about this issue you raised about the role of the academia of contributing to epistemic justice. Because as I guess various people within the room maybe started not from a purely academic interest on coming into this space of social studies, development studies, anthropology, and so on and so forth, it was rather a feeling of maybe in the beginning get to knowing the enemy, being also aware in the meantime that people in social movements are highly mistrusting academics as part of the spectrum of hegemony, and of at the same time being in a type of like schizophrenic position, I would say, of trying to navigate through hegemonic ties of already existing epistemology in order to be able to grasp what is going on there and come back, maybe back down on the practical level, on the grassroots level, with some patterns of solutions that could be applied for more cases in one go. Not that the single case doesn't matter, it always matters, but I think you see my point. I would be very thankful if we could extend the discussion also a little bit to this domain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was it you that...
Good morning. Thank you very much also for this very inspiring dialogue, and also for the video, and especially for accentuating the importance of very local acts of solidarity. Now, my question might be a little bit the same as yesterday, but posed in another way, but it's really something I'm personally struggling with. So I would like you to comment a bit more on the politics of solidarity on both local and global scales, and how they are interconnected with, I think, the most local scale, the body, up to much more global levels. But I'm also asking this because for the moment I'm involved in research about global citizenship education, and we sent well, I'm related to an advanced bachelor in which we send young people for 6 months to the south, and they're prepared for this, and all this with the aim to educate them to become global citizens. And what we notice is that to become global citizens, it very much happens through the body, and it's on a very, on that smallest scale. But then we kind of try to critically look at the impact of these exchanges, both on the student in the north, also in the south. But then I kind of struggle with how does it feed back into the global, and how is it interconnected, and I find that very difficult.
Okay. Since I was assigned to look at the time, and since I've seen that we are sort of running into the coffee break, may I ask Rosalba and Wendy both to respond in 2 minutes each, and then sort of continue the dialogue upstairs over a coffee? Yeah? Who would like to start? Wendy? Please.
I just, well, thank you all very much for being part of the dialogue. I wanted to respond in my 2 minutes to exactly your issue around the politics of solidarity, and trying not to be an academic in this context, but certainly in the end I entered into the field of academia via my writing out of my own experiences, exactly with this struggle of how does one engage in solidarity as a feminist in this thing called development, which I found myself in by mistake, as one does. And it was a book I wrote actually called, well, it's basically called Body Politics in Development. And it's looking at critical debates around gender. I had to sort of add gender in there. But essentially it is about me thinking through theoretically exactly those dilemmas. So why I say it is because what surprised me about writing that book, took me 20 years to find the voice to write it, because I didn't think I had the academic voice nor the voice of the global south. So who was I to write this book? But then I decided that, yes, eventually I had some stories to tell, and at least in unpacking those stories, I help people like us to think through what we're trying to do, because I was always engaged with the passion, with the concern to be making that social change. So in the end, why I'm telling this story is that, yes, I managed to write the book, but through writing the book, I got into academe. You see, this is a funny thing, because I thought I was an outsider, but by the writing of it, I became an insider. So it's a kind of just a funny quirk of my life. But I think it's exactly by trying to be honest and open and saying these are the issues, the emotions are the issues, the bodies are the issues, these complicated, messy stories, your story, all of the stories we've told. This is as much part of our academic knowledge about doing development, because it's in the doing that we're creating the knowledge. There's not that difference. So that, which is what I think you were also saying yesterday, Frederic, but I think we forget that it's actually the ontology of how we are doing this is creating what, not only the discipline or the academic mode, but also it's shifting and changing the subject that we are and what we're writing about. So I think telling the story of what you're doing, writing the story of your experience is going to help shift our understanding of how indeed one does do solidarity. So it's that sort of praxis really of how one is doing activist research, and it refolds back on one another. But in doing it, we have to be very clear that it is doing it. It is not just thinking it. I think that's the important point for me.
I assume that you're referring to the Going Local project here in the Netherlands that send the students. I assume that you're referring to the Going Local project? No. Okay. Okay, okay. Yeah. Because there is another project, now that you comment on that, based here in the Netherlands, in which also advanced graduate students are going to be, well, they have already visited Namibia, and now they are going to Mexico during the summer. And one of the main issues that we have, I'm part of the team that designed the project, and that now I'm supposed to accompany these students to Oaxaca, Mexico. And one of the main questions we have was, okay, they are going to be living with indigenous communities. We need to avoid academic tourism. They are going to work with them. They are going to be serving some of their projects that they are developing there. But they are going to be part of the families. They are going to be well received there. We trust, but we haven't actually articulated, that this personal experience, this subjective experience there is going to have, of course, an effect on them. It has already had an effect on the ones who have come back from Namibia. One of the concrete issues that they are doing now is that they are teaching about their experiences in Namibia and notions of how they will very well receive. Actually, they are talking about well received, welcoming in these communities in primary schools around Sealand. So this is a tiny example that they actually put in the table. We want to share with little kids how welcoming can be work in a different setting. So this is a very concrete idea with which they came back to the Netherlands. Very basic, and I will finish with this. The role of the academia. Well, this is exactly the same problem that I have been experiencing myself since I realized that I was doing not only academic work, that it's supposed to be objective, but that I was very much engaged with some of the groups with whom I was working in that moment. And this brings me to a very concrete question that I have been very, very grateful for receiving it, because it's a very simple one, but a very deep one, that comes from Arturo Escobar. When I was once talking with him, he asked me very simply, what for you are doing the research you are doing? Which is the purpose of this research? And my own experience in my research, in my writing, is that I start always asking myself this question, what for? Why I'm doing this collaboration? Why I'm doing this essay? Why I'm writing this piece of paper? I try to be honest with myself, first of all, but I also try to be politically honest, politically honest always with the people with whom I work in sharing. I'm writing this piece about our reflections or our joint reflections because I want to achieve this and this. In some instances, as Silke is saying, is possible, especially with other academics based in the South, with academics, activists with whom I collaborate in the South. In other instances, of course, there are power relationships, but power operates in a two direction. If I'm also saying, and this is part of the story, that I took the position of rethinking some of the main concepts of my discipline while listening to Zapatistas' women experiences, is also because this is one example of a highly documented, highly represented, highly theorized and let's say assessed movement that tried to revert this position and close any possibility of research with them because they were not objects of study of anybody after years and years of receiving academics. And since the beginning, the relationship has been like that. And the minimal conversations that I have now is under that specific relationship. You are not here to do research on us. You are here because you want to hear what we think, but we are not your object of study. So it's really problematic because power operates in two ways, and I respect that because who I am to ask them to allow me to conduct a research about them if I'm just a mestizo Mexican coming as many other academic tourists there to try to understand what they are fighting for. So this is what I managed to do, just to question my discipline with, and trying to find some answers that my discipline was not providing me with in the moment I start my engagement with these communities in rebellion, comunidades en rebeldía in Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosalba. The screensaver is also taking over. We are coming to the end of a very inspiring, I would say, very inspiring, very nice discussion that we should continue. We can continue it now over the break, but we should also continue that over the next few days. There will be several occasions. I may flag the two sessions, interactive sessions that Robert Chambers is doing on Wednesday and Thursday morning, for which you are very welcome. Thank you very much, Wendy and Rosalba, for initiating that. Thank you very much, Helen, John and Silke for responding, and thanking also you for participating in this. Thank you very much. Take the mic. Take the mic.
Sorry, there is one announcement from Sarah who is coming right now here.
Okay, I just want to take a moment while we're all here to thank the main organizers of this conference, Steffi, Tamara, and Kai. If you could. On behalf of other PhD students, we're very grateful that they managed to organize this amazing conference. So we have something for you. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rosalba. Thank you. No. So